Today we're joining Enrichmond's TreeLab Manager, McFarland, for a walk through the woods at Historic Evergreen Cemetery. He identifies native plant specimens as well as invasive species that are difficult to control.
So at the entrance of Evergreen Cemetery, another oak tree you don't see too often, water oak, Quercus nigra. Leaves look nothing like an oak, but this tree is right here by the entrance, so it's easy to spot. So here we have Tree of Heaven, a highly invasive species, but we've got a fair amount of it here at Evergreen and both in East End Cemetery, but they're flowering now. Showy, but somewhat nondescript, but their leaves look a lot like sumac, although sumacs obviously don't get as tall as 30-40 foot trees. They also look a lot like black walnut, which is actually the tree next to us. Over there is black walnut, and you can see from a distance how they look similar. But the Tree of Heaven, extremely fast growing, and their trunk is a easy indicator, very smooth, dark grayish with kind of some white streaks in it. And we've got a lot of them here. These are just on the edge, but there's some bigger ones throughout both cemeteries. So here's a real interesting find. You'll find it growing a lot of times in wood chips or mulch. And it smells as disgusting as it looks, but that's the idea. This is something called elegant stinkhorn, Mutinous elegans. It is a type of fungus, and basically what it does is, if you were to smell it up close, which I honestly wouldn't suggest, it'll smell like rotting meat or just decaying material, because it attracts flies and insects to the slimy part on top, which in that slime is the spores, which when the insects land on that and feed on it, that helps disperse them. And here too, it's just coming up, I guess what is called the egg form of this, or stage. These are young ones that kind of, I guess you'd say, hatch out of the those little shells. So here we have a native plant, actually. This is Yucca filamentosa, and you can see it gets the species name filamentosa because it kind of has these little white filament looking things that come off the edges of the leaf blades. And right now here at the Evergreen Cemetery property, you can see they're getting ready to flower, and they get these tall stalks, and they get these giant white bell-shaped flowers, and you can see there's a lot right here by the main entrance that are going to get ready to flower here in probably the next week or two. It's super beautiful to see when these are all opened up. Here we have our native eastern red cedar, which actually isn't a cedar at all. It's Juniperus virginiana. It's a type of juniper. This is a very prominent one here at Evergreen. Also very visible from the main entrance when you pull in. And you can see it's got two distinct trunks that makes it a little different than the average tree, but you can see their usual shape, kind of pyramidal. And we'll go up closer and take a look at a lot of the fruits on it this year. So close up on the red cedar, you can see the bark is kind of long, it looks kind of striated, it's a bit, sloughs off pretty easy, kind of stringy. That's a pretty easy feature to see on these. Also they're evergreen, so that makes them more obvious. The trees are really loaded with fruits. These have yet to mature to full size. But this year there was tons of pollen coming off of the cedar trees, but you can see actually really pretty color. It's kind of light bluish color to the fruits, and then they'll get larger, mature, and then birds will eat them and help disperse the seed everywhere. So here we have a big native hackberry, Celtis occidentalis. It's over by Maggie Walker's gravesite. It's hard to miss. This is a large specimen, but a defining feature on these as they get older is the trunk will be kind of gray, and down here it's much more bumpy, but a little further up this branch, you can see where it's smooth and bumpy at the same time. And that's a pretty easy way to spot them when you're walking through the forest. Otherwise, their leaves are kind of nondescript, serrated edges, easy to see leaf veins on them. They look kind of a lot like elm leaves. And these will get berries that the birds love to eat. It's a big food source for them. So yeah, just another really neat big old tree here at Evergreen Cemetery. Here we've got a really large willow oak, Quercus fellows, that from old aerial images of the cemetery from the 1930s, this is one of the few trees you can actually see in those photographs. Unfortunately, as you can see, it is not very alive anymore. It's probably on its way out sooner instead of later, but it's a tree worth noting and taking a look at, and you'll get a feel for the size when you get up close to look at the trunk of the tree. So here you can see how big this willow oak tree is. Quite large. I can only imagine, since it was pretty big in the pictures from the 1930s, that it's got to be 150 plus years old. And you can see there's tons of vines growing up it. You got some grapevine, but the worst thing growing up is the English ivy on the trunk. Here it's an evergreen, and it is all over the cemetery, but it's got glossy leaves when it's new and comes out, and you can see it latches onto the tree trunk. It can choke trees out. Eventually it'll grow up to the tops, and actually these small little hairs do kind of get into the bark and will actually take some little bits of water and nutrient from the tree also, which is also what declines the health of the tree over time. But best thing to do is end up chopping these close to the ground, cutting off that circulation. Eventually they brown out and die off, but constant battle here at Evergreen Cemetery. Another big invasive plant issue here at Evergreen Cemetery is Japanese wisteria. Vining plant, much like the ivy. Beautiful purple flowers. They smell great. It smells wonderful down here when it is in full bloom. But here's a little bit of it. It creeps and runs across the ground and climbs trees. Kind of papery leaves, compound. But you can see it's taken over basically that whole area down there. All in the trees, all in the ground. It's impossible to walk through. It's choking out, if not killed, most of the trees down there already. So it's a big undertaking to try and get that out. So we found some of the big ones just near the path. You'd think this is a tree, but this is one of the wisteria vines. But you can imagine, again, the weight that this is going to have on the tree and all the extra foliage is just potentially going to pull it down one day. But here's an example of how big they can get. Quite big. And here you can see a couple of pretty large tulip poplars, Liriodendron tulipifera. They have that kind of light gray to almost white bark. See, they're tall, straight, they grow fast. And in this area too, we're kind of closer to Stony Run Creek, but down in the bottom land of this area, there's that kind of dense, dark green looking shrubs. That is Japanese knotweed, very invasive plant. Loves wet sites and wet growing conditions, spreads by its roots like crazy. Pollinators love the flowers though. I guess that's maybe one upside, but it can take over areas quickly. You can see it in the front and towards the back. Another hard one we'll eventually have to try and root out of the cemetery here. So here, growing amongst with the wisteria, we have another very invasive vining plant that most people are familiar with, Kudzu. You can see it's got 3 leaves. Don't confuse it with poison ivy. It's much bigger compared to what poison ivy looks like. And you can see it's starting to intertwine in this area with the wisteria. Just another nasty vine that can also just grow rampant, tear down trees, suffocate them, kill them. So it's another highly invasive vining species here at Evergreen Cemetery. Here we have a large white oak Quercus alba specimen. This is a bit off the beaten track at evergreen. As you look further up the trunk, you can kind of see where it looks like it wants to be kind of shaggy and peel off, like in shingle type pieces. Easy defining feature of the white oak. Here we have a large stand of clethra. I believe a common name is sweet pepperbush. Blooms white, and the native species, when it's growing naturally, will colonize areas like this. So, I mean, it's covering all this area down to our right. Kind of this shiny leaf. They're very fragrant flowers. But if you ever get these and buy them at a store and plant them in your home landscape, they never actually spread and colonize like this. And nobody's really sure quite why that happens, which makes it unique to find it in the wild in such large stands like this. And there's a few of these both on Evergreen's property and on East End's property as well. Oh, that's disgusting. That does not smell good.